wanted to make that as a background. I haven't quite figured that part out. So I'm gonna stop share. All right. Do you want to get started? We're doing well?
Yes.
We wanted to make this a conversation, right?
That's right. Get discussions flowing with good questions, with the right answers.
Right. So why don't we have Rob, why don't you start off with telling us about, why don't you start off by telling us about Ethos 108?
Yes. Good morning. Well, good afternoon now. We crossed that line.
Depending on where you are. I saw exactly. Mark from Las Vegas.
Exactly. Hello, Mark from Las Vegas. Thanks for joining us. And good morning, good afternoon. Happy Saturday. How about that? I'm Rob Joel of Ethos 108. Ethos 108 is a hub of influencers that's all around the country now. It started here in Maryland with about 60 individuals and has grown. It's been a true blessing to me. It's grown around the country and a few internationally as well, with over 500 influencers who I call that are the GOATs, the greatest of all time for their families and communities minimally. So we have individuals like Amy Griffin here, who's doing amazing things in DC and the DC area and all around. And if you're like me, you come from a family that does not talk about legacy planning and so forth. A couple of reasons that I can assume without reaching out to my mother and father. But I think one is, is one of those subjects that perhaps they may not have known what to teach at that time coming up. And it's one of those subjects to me that it's like, okay, do we really want to talk about that? However common, it needs to be talked about. And me, approaching a second retirement in a couple of years with an 11-year-old, I need to learn. So having said that, if you find that you're interested, if you're not on Ethos 108 and you find that you would like to join on, man, I tell you what, we're looking forward to building it into the community around the world that is becoming of those that want to mentor and be mentored by individuals like Attorney Amy Griffin, and to learn from their wheelhouse, if you will. So just email me and I'll make it happen. But with having said that, we have a lot to, first off, let me thank you, Amy, for taking the time, carving out the time on a Saturday to make this happen and spreading your words of wisdom and knowledge that we all need to learn. And there's a whole lot to talk about. I'm actually chatting with Amy with possibly making a series, if you will, of this, because there's so much information and it's hard to put in an hour and a half. But having said that, being that we're short on time, let me go ahead and take the baton and pass it to Amy so we can continue and learn about legacy planning and generational wealth within our communities. Thank you, Amy.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever it is. So how we're going to discuss today, just sort of start with like questions and conversation and what is a brief introduction to who I am is I went to law school at 40 because I realized that you can't win the game if you don't know the rules, and the rules are the law. And so I went to law school with no intention of actually practicing law. It was my intention of supporting economic empowerment. I am the child of civil rights leaders. And so as such, I was brought up realizing that I can't prosper if my community doesn't prosper. When I came out of law school, the first thing I did was created the New England Black Chamber of Commerce. And that was because I lived in Springfield, Massachusetts, and what I could see is that there were people who were benefiting, but it wasn't the people that were in our community. And so the Black people in our community, I should say, we are a minority in Springfield, Massachusetts. Indeed, the Black folks were indeed the minority, but the inequity was so great. So it's like, how do we create access to an opportunity? And so I created the New England Black Chamber of Commerce. And as I was, I think, helpful or impactful, we were impactful with the firm that I had in building opportunities and access for the businesses. What happened was business leaders would pass away. And as such, when they did, all that they had built up was lost. And so I went back to law school and got my Master of Laws in Elder Law and Estate Planning. So how do we strategically plan and pass on the assets that we worked so hard to create? And so I tell people all the time, God delivered me from Massachusetts in the snow to Washington, D.C. And so as such, I'm thrilled to be a part of the creation of what is the U.S. Black Chambers. And we started with 8 Black Chambers and now have, I believe, 130 Black Chambers across the world. So not just the United States, we have Africa and the Caribbean as well. So I'm excited that I was a part of the creation of that. And so, but what I know is, as I see living in the DMV, I live in Maryland, and having offices in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, and Massachusetts still, what we know is that we need to strategically plan it because it has a greater impact on us. And so I'm going to, again, share my screen again and begin, I think I am, I say that. And begin sharing with you a bit on the conversation. All right. And I apologize in advance for my technological challenges because you will see them. I always want to say, though, that I am thrilled to be a part of a firm. Now, I will say to you that we are, at the end of this month, we will have a new picture because a lot of our women have changed, but we are a firm of Black women, women of color, and our core values are faith, excellence, relationship, service, and trustworthiness. And our commitment is building strategically for multiple generational wealth, right? But it is, we don't do, this is our lane: estate planning, estate administration, as well as business succession planning, right? So what happens, what is estate planning? So a lot of people don't even know when we use the words, what is it, right? The answer is 3 questions. What happens when you die is what we know. And then so often we don't want to think anymore about it because you don't want to talk about what happens when I die, because I'll be dead, I don't care. But we do care about what happens if I can't take care of myself. But the strongest piece that we need to be thinking about as Black folks is what's going to be our legacy, right? We know that we have people who we love far beyond us, prayerfully. And then we need to be thinking about what does that look like? How do we strategically plan? How does that impact our community, right? We say all the time at our firm that we are building strong communities, one family at a time. And what we know is that estate planning is a holistic strategic financial planning. It's not just about what happens when I die, because we can't just think of it that way. We have to think of it in a whole significant way. What happens to our children? How do we plan and build seeds for? How do we incorporate our insurance, our investments? I say all of the time, if I could write a great estate plan, but it's only $47.50, it doesn't have an impact. So what we know as a community is we need to do strategic, holistic, strategic, comprehensive financial planning. And there is a thing that wealthy people do. Wealthy people have what's called a family office. And so they don't tell us about this. A lot of people don't even know what a family office is. But if you go to Bank of America, US Trust, any of those organizations and speak about what is a family office, they will share with you the connectedness of how strategic estate planning is. Now, And why, what my heart desires, when I first went to law school, I had no intention of practicing law. My intention was to bring information to the community so that we can have it and build upon it. And this is what this is what we're doing here today. If we look at the family office, and I'm trying to expose this to folks because what we know is you see that they're in states and trusts that speaks to our real estate, our asset protection, our investment process. What we know is only about 2% of investment advisors look like us, look like me. So I'm not sure who's all on the call. Only about 2% look like us. And so that creating a fund, because it's not necessarily, I mean, strategically planning, the fund lives beyond us. Business succession, if you are building a business, and many of us know that that because of the racial wage gap, that we're not paid equally. I mean, and I'm a woman and a Black person. So we know that there are double hits. Black people are paid less and women are paid less. So many times we find in order to truly have our value recognized and appreciated, we need to create our own businesses. Actually, subsequently, our access to capital is a strategic issue with building and growing our businesses. Labor and employment, employee benefits, all of these work together to create multi-generational wealth. Philanthropy, how do we strategically give? One of the things that we know that what's important about having a Black community strategically planned together is if we know that I am hiring you, if I'm hiring a Black business and that Black business owner invests in their employees, we know we're investing in our community. What we see a lot of times is our professional sports, special sports people. I'm not a sports person. Our players, they hire agents, and their agents get paid about 10% of what they get, right? And so that millions of dollars that they get creates hundreds of thousands for their agents. And those agents are, if they don't look like us, they invest in their communities, not ours. So we need to be thinking about the cyclical nature of how do we invest in our communities? How do we strategically plan for our communities to better? So what we know is that we are indeed better together, and knowing that our financial circle is a continuum, right?
That's awesome. Family office. I never heard of that, Amy. I'm learning.
Right, and that's the thing. So many people, and actually let me ask for those people who are in the participants, if you've heard of a family office before, give me some feedback in the chat, yeah. Right? So that we know, right? What we know is that strategic financial planning is a collaborative effort. I'm reaching out to Mark Purnell, who I know who's on here, who is a significant financial advisor, and invest in financial advisors too as a coach so that they can build up their capacity, because we know it strikes up against us. We need to be building and growing in. Yeah, Danita hasn't heard of the family office as well, but those folks with wealth do. But we can create that within our community. We can strategically plan that which is in our community. So what is different for the Black community? What we know is, we can say we live in America, the land of opportunity, land of great. Their glasses are mostly full and ours are mostly empty. How do we level the playing field to make to create opportunity and access for us? Because we know we can say that, yeah, we're all born here, we're all born or live here, and so we have access to the same assets that we do. But is that even true? As I look at even this image of our folks, a water glass, and I think of Flint, Michigan. Right. Even our water isn't equal. Right. So we got to be really right. And so if we are living in an environment, if we are living in a space where we know that there is inequity, if we think about that we know that we don't start off at zero. And if I don't want to dwell too long or too hard, but the reality is for 400 plus years, and this is significant, right? This is Juneteenth month, right? When for 400 plus years, we were helping other people create wealth, right? for 400 years, people were, as I think about my business, my greatest cost is my employees. If we got that for free, how much further off we'd be, further ahead of the game. So if we look at the level playing field, we know that is not true. What we also know is that for forever, the resources and the tools that we have for investment for building weren't available to us. We think about, we know about some things we know about, some things we didn't even know about, redlining. Right. So as we were not allowed to buy in properties, as well as in our community, in certain communities, when the GI Bill was passed and that they were allowed to come out and get real property with a mortgage, but they weren't allowed to have mortgages in the areas that were Black communities. So we could, and clearly they weren't going to sell to us in white communities. So even after the Emancipation Proclamation, we weren't allowed to have access to assets or to build our assets. We talk about the racial wealth gap. We're here all of the time about how Black families have 1/10 of the wealth of white families. But we hear about consumerism of the Black community. But the truth of the matter is we've been denied for so long access to opportunity. Our wealth is not our wealth was restricted from us. And so, and in addition, we weren't even allowed to buy significant life insurance because our life insurance cost more than theirs, because they said our lives, not only they didn't say our lives were more valuable, but our lives were a greater risk. Right. So many people we know are like the Rockefellers buy life insurance on their children when they're immediately born to continue to create that investment for future generations, because we know that that's a thing to invest in, because we know it's going to pay off. But if we don't plan for it, we don't value it and recognize it, it's not going to happen for us. We know that so often people were sold death benefits, not life benefits. And I don't know if anybody remembers or knows about when the insurance man would come with a little book, and then they would make collections, but it was just enough to pay to put folks in the ground. And that wasn't significant. That did not have an impact on changing lives. Now, I used to bemoan that all the time, but now I will also say that when we see the GoFundMe accounts that people have when someone's passed away, it almost makes me hearken back to and relish the death benefits are paid, because at least we're not having people go into debt to pay for that which, when somebody has passed away. The degradation that is experienced. I know there was a comedian, I can't think of his name right now, who passed away, and his wife had a GoFundMe account and was quite angry at his fans or perceived fans, because they didn't want to pay for contribute to the GoFundMe account when that comedian had passed away. Now, I say to you, if anybody remembers who that comedian is, can you put it in the chat for us so that we'll know, we can look it up. But we know that people are, we see GoFundMe accounts for people who pass away all of the time. Are we thoughtful about what happens with that? Are we thoughtful how to protect our loved ones? And the comedian's wife, who got mad because his fans didn't want to contribute. And I think about, why is that? Why does she think there is a duty, an entitlement to have someone else pay for the care and the protection of your passing on? I don't think that's what we should be doing. I don't think that's what should be happening. I think that we should be mindful of, when we come into this life, who should be able to care for ourselves? Who do we care for? Right? We should be we should be leaving the people who come behind us in better condition, in better position. And we know that we have a greater responsibility, because no one's going to take care of us for us. We need to be leaving a mark that is enhancing the lives of the people who come after us.
Good statement, Amy. And I've also realized with the redlining map you just had up,
Uh-huh.
if I saw it correctly, that's Philadelphia. And me being from Philadelphia, I was like, wow, I didn't see this how specific that was until I really looked at it. And I tell you what, that's really interesting, having something there that I
It
could
speaks
see.
to you, right? Makes it come alive, right?
Exactly.
And I think so often we think about it in sort of an abstract way and sort of creates a distance for us, right? So we don't necessarily feel like, no, that's not really me. That's not really impacting me.
You you
Right?
you, you went home for me. You took it home.
And I hope it's taken home for everybody,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because I think that's what's going to make us act.
That's
We're not going to act if we don't feel like it hits us,
that is
right?
the truth.
One of the things that I have mixed emotions about the celebration of Juneteenth, right? Now, because I feel that while indeed it is the Emancipation Proclamation, in essence, that we're celebrating, is that what's odd about that a little bit for me is we're celebrating the fact that they ended slavery. It's true they ended slavery, but it should never have happened, right? And then also Juneteenth, the other part about this, I wrote an article about that this month, is that Juneteenth was June 19th, 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation, when supposedly enslaved people were released, was January 1st, 1863. It was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that the word got out, right? So again, we continue to toil and giving folks that which our free labor, because we didn't have the capacity to leave. We survived the impossible. And that's what we were given permission to celebrate again. And so I have mixed emotions about that because, again, we survived the kidnapping, the murdering, the raping. And so that's what we're celebrating. That we did, but it's just sort of feels so unjust and right that we're celebrating survival.
I love the way you just presented that, because that is extremely profound. Matter of fact, I would like to include it in the commentary in an upcoming edition of Ethos 108, because the way you just presented that, Amy, we need to put on our brakes with these Juneteenth celebrations and think about that. That's deep.
One of the other, revelations to me is, if indeed we were free, if indeed, we're acknowledging that when it took 2.5 years for people to even make sure that was enforced, because slavery was still going strong for 2.5 years. But on top of that, in many cases, in many situations, the Black people outnumbered the white folks. And at any time they could have overtaken if we were united.
Wow.
If we were acknowledged our power.
Wow. I never thought about it like that.
And so again, I was raised by civil rights folks. And so if we thought about at any time, we could have taken over those places where we outnumbered, but we didn't. Right. So we survived the impossible. Those Black folks who were enslaved and still lived through, endured so much. But one of the things that I always want us to be mindful of is how we can be mindful of that power that we have and impose it, take advantage of it, tap into it. One of the things I saw that Mark Pennell wrote in the chat, that he creates virtual family offices for his clients, because indeed we've got the power if we embrace it, if we are informed about it. We can't take for granted the knowledge. We've got to make it happen when we make it happen, right? But we need to say, can't wait for somebody else to do it for us, with us. We got to create it for us, right? And stops. We can't stand on survival as an appreciation for surviving. We have to stand on that we can do and be so much more. 50% of adults, and the statistics of all Americans, it says 50% die without a will. And so 70% of Black folks die without a will. So sometimes you look at that and say, so we're not so bad off, but we know that we skew the number, right? We skew the number of the 50% because we got 70%. And if 70% of adults die without a will, it's because either we don't care, that we aren't going to take the effort, or we think we ain't going to die, right? And so if we are mindful of not planning for what is inevitable, we don't know the day or the hour for those of us with faith, right? We don't know the day of our, but we know that is coming. I don't know anybody who really believes they're going to get out of here alive. So if we don't plan, is it that we just don't care about those folks who come after us or the people that we love? But if indeed only 30% of Black folks die without a will, or die with a will, that means that we aren't planning for the benefit of the people who we leave behind. Yeah. Is that just selfish? I think that it's more a case of that we don't think we have enough to plan for. Those of us who are those of you on the chat, if you don't have a will, if you know folks who don't have a will, tell me why you don't. Give me feedback about why you don't have a will in place. Because again, 30%, only 30% do. There are people who do not. So why is it that you think we don't, right? And I will say to you, a lot of times we don't think we have. People say to me, we don't have enough. People say to me, I don't know anybody that I can speak to make sure that happens. Or I'll never forget, I had a woman who heard me speak, coming to a meeting with me and said, okay, thank you for the information. She wanted to know how she could preserve her assets in case there was a need for Medicaid. Because you know that they will claw back if indeed you don't have, if you have Medicaid in your house, they'll take your house after the fact. And so we talked about how she could preserve that. And then what happened was she said, okay, thank you, Miss Griffin. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to wait, right? And I said, because I was raised right, I said to her, excuse me, ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? Mm-hmm. And I swear, if my mom used to say, if I'm lying, I'm flying, she said 90. She said 90 years old. Wow. And she was going to wait. And wow. I wanted to say, what you going to wait for? Yeah. But I didn't say that. Her daughter said, Mom, let's go ahead and get this done. Let's go ahead and do this, right? Yeah. So if indeed people are saying that they are not doing it because they haven't made it a priority, if they said they don't want to pay for it, if they said that I'm going to put it off, because we can't procrastinate those things that aren't as much fun, right? Yeah. But if indeed we think, I say to people, we go to work because not because we want to, but it's for the betterment of the people that we love. This is one of those things that we should be thinking about, not just because we love other folks, but because of how it impacts us and them, right? Yeah.
No, you're right, Amy. If I can interject real quick.
Please.
A coworker of mine who's in his mid-30s got married a year ago, and he asked me a couple of weeks ago, because I'm with the federal government. He said, hey, Rob, I need a witness to sign a will. Would you mind coming up? And I'm thinking, well, of course, but he said it so casually, like, this is what we do, And there was, and with the federal government, there's no cost. Mm-hmm. It's in the same building, So I said, sure. I would be stupid to turn it down. One, from my own experience. Mm-hmm. And I went to be a witness, and the federal government provided two lawyers. Oh, I'm sorry. One was a notary, and the other one was an actual lawyer. We went to a conference room. We had to read parts of the will. I had to sign about five documents as a witness, and I was feeling, if I could have hit myself upside the head a couple of times, I would have, because this guy, he just turned 36, and he's a white guy. It was just a natural thing to do, and for me, I'm like, why haven't I had this done yet?
And you know me.
Right. Right.
You hear me yell about this for more than a minute.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I deserve it. I deserve to be put in time out for this.
There was I was in I'm telling myself I was in the BWI airport, and one of my favorite stores in BWI is the Pandora jewelry store.
Mhm.
And so Pandora has these charms, and
Right.
I was in there, and I said to there was the black cashier, and I said, "Oh, I'm looking for a charm for. I'm a lawyer, and I'd like a charm that represents that." And she said, "Oh, what kind of law do you practice?" And I said, "I'm an estate planning attorney." And she said, "Oh, I really need to get that done. I'm a single mom I'm a single mom with a minor child." And I said, "Oh, you absolutely do."
Mhm.
And she was in her like mid-30s. The young lady who was next to her said, "Oh my gosh, I had mine done since I was 18." Because she said, "My
Wow.
parents made sure I got that done."
Wow.
Right. And I tell people all of the time, that's when we should have our first plan, when we are 18.
And that's
Right.
and that's
Absolutely.
wow. And
Because
the
we are
first celebrity,
adults.
yeah. And the first celebrity that comes to mind, I'm sure to everybody on here too, is Aretha Franklin. I mean,
Aretha Franklin is
that's
a great example.
right.
Because she had, and it's for a number of reasons, not just that she was penny wise and pound foolish. She had a bunch of handwritten wills. It was like Mark said, folks get cheap at the wrong time. She had a whole bunch of handwritten wills, and so they didn't know which one was which.
Oh, okay.
And she had a child with special needs.
Oh,
If you have a child or a loved one who is going to receive from you, and they have special needs, you can be jacking up their benefits, their Social Security benefits or their Medicaid benefits if they receive if they have at one time more than $2,500.
wow.
We got to be planned for it. And unfortunately, I have the burden of seeing that far too often. So
Wow.
we need to be planning accordingly. So, and then again, 70% of us
Yeah.
don't have that. One of the things that one of my nonprofits is trying to invert the statistic from 30% that have a will to 30% that do not.
Amen.
That's one of my
Thank
goals.
you for that. Thank you.
So now we need to move our mindset from surviving to thriving. Thinking about how do we get from just trying to survive. And I think that's what happens. That's what stops us from doing what we need to do. Because at this point, what we know is the racial wealth gap that we have in the Black community continues to grow, right? And while we have folks who are, one of my favorite examples we talk about, we have the Oprah Winfrey's of the world who are, billionaires. So it makes us feel like we're doing better. But if we compare Oprah Winfrey as one of our greatest, most successful financially people to Bezos, right? There's no comparison. Right. So if we look at that in strategic planning in such a way that while she's given back his capacity to give back and the number of those folks that they have as we compare the Black community to the white community. And as we think about and strategically plan, if we don't do better, we're not going to get better. Right. If we look at our inability to completely manage and transform that which we've done, if we think about COVID, how that has impacted our community as well, right? Now, as the fact that we Black people work more in the service industries. So if we were sick and unable to go to work, then what we know is we had typically hourly salaries. Service workers tend to have hourly employees. So they couldn't go because of COVID. And so therefore that gap grew. And then if indeed they were sick and died, because a lot of people were sick and died, they didn't have the life insurance that would be able to care for their family members. And so that was a significant loss. In addition, one of the realities that we know in our Black community is that we don't trust a lot of people. We don't trust the government because what we know is we had the syphilis. We had so many experiences where people have taken advantage and the Black community has suffered because we've been the guinea pigs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily running to get that vaccination,
Yeah.
but we know when we don't, who gets hurt the most. When we die, who does that impact the most? If we don't do anything to be transformative for the benefit of our community or for our family, and if we can't, a lot of times we can't even afford it if we don't have insurance, right? If we don't strategically plan accordingly, we are not able to create the best opportunity or growth for our families. So we need to, often we're stuck between the rock and the hard place. We have our parents as a generation, and we have our children we need to be planning for. So we need to be thinking about how do we strategically build if we don't have our plan. One of the things, again, many of us don't have long-term care insurance, right? So if our parents need that long-term care or need to go into a nursing home because we can't care for them or we don't have the resources to do that, what happens? So we lose the house that they have created, which is oftentimes the wealth that we're able to inherit. I have so many clients that come through that don't look like us, and they've received multiple properties from their parents. So often we have our parents where we receive properties with reverse mortgages on them.
Wow.
Right. And so I've had clients who lose their home as well as their parents because of reverse mortgage, because we haven't planned. Right. Or again, if they were just in a nursing home, and if the nursing home, if they were on Medicaid, the parent is able to, not able, although they had a house that had no mortgage, because of they were in the nursing home, they put a lien on the property, and the property, when it goes through the probate process, requires selling. So that inheritance is lost, right? But then we're starting all over again, right? If we're not starting further back, not even at the starting line, we've lost 10 centimeters, we have to go back first. So if we don't have a plan, if we don't have a will, you've made the choice to allow the government to determine who gets it and how. Now, the biggest part of that, which I say is one of the biggest governmental scams ever, is that we pay the court to give our loved ones the stuff that we have. Do you see that craziness? And the more we have, the more we pay them, right? It is the court costs in probate is, well, let me just go back. Probate means the lawsuit or the process where you take the assets that are in your name and transfer them. It's transferred out of your name to your loved ones. If you don't have a will, there's a formula that the government applies. And each state may have slightly different. It's typically about the same, where your spouse gets a percentage. Be clear, not everything goes to your spouse, because sometimes folks all say, "Oh, it's all going to go to my wife, and we'll be all set." That's not true, right? A portion will go to your spouse, a portion will go to your kids. If you don't have kids, a portion will go to your spouse, and a portion goes to your parents. So I had, unfortunately, the situation where a man whose name was on his house solely, and he left a wife and a child from a previous marriage. That house would have to be sold so the wife could keep her portion and the son gets his portion.
Wow.
Right? If we don't think about it, we don't plan for it. And I would love to say that all of our kids are really good and we will care for our parents. That's not our truth. We have kids who have issues. We have kids who don't have good relationships. We have kids who have substance abuse and mental health issues. So we also have kids who have disabilities. And with that being said, that could result in requiring people to sell the property just in order to survive. What we also know is, let's say you went to the hospital and so you had a final debt. Let me just go back up again. So when you go through probate, the first thing that happens is that they take the petition for probate to say, who do you want to receive? Who do you want to have appointed as the executor? But they put a notice in the paper to say, Amy died, does she owe you money? Because they want the creditors to be paid first. So if I had no bills I mean, I had no cash, but I had a house, and then I had no bills because I'm really good about paying my bills, but I ended up in the hospital. And so I had medical bills when I passed away. Then, but the only thing that I had to pass on to my heirs was my house. But these bills have to be paid. That house has to be sold in order to make sure that those creditors are paid.
Interesting.
So what we don't realize is what that happens. And the other thing is, if I have 3 kids or 2 kids, and the only thing that I have to pass on is the house, what happens is that how can you give a half or a third of a house to a child?
Mhm.
It has to be sold.
Right.
And I try to encourage my people all of the time to try to make sure that property can stay intact. I encourage people to be thinking about appreciating assets,
Mhm.
because if indeed, I say all the time, property appreciates, money evaporates, right? And if we are thoughtful about that, we can help create assets for multiple generations. We want to encourage people to have the assets grow so that our kids and our kids' kids are better off because we lived, as opposed to creating a burden for them, right? One of the things that we say is even at the best case scenario, going through the probate process is one, you have to pay for the greater assets we have, that money we're giving to the court. That's the first and foremost. And then there's a delay in access to the assets because, of course, we have to go through the whole creditors period. So not only do you have to wait for Sears of Roebuck and JCPenney and American Express to come forward to say that you're owed, we have to then wait for them to be paid off and then say to the court that they were paid before we can make those distributions to the assets. Now, I will say to you, I'm thankful that lawyers get paid a lot for that, but I don't want my family to be paying lawyers to make sure that happens.
Right.
The other thing that I always like to remember and acknowledge the fact that as a Black family, we typically don't follow the strategic formula that the court has created. We typically, in addition to because we don't necessarily run to the court or run to the law to support us, we get married without necessarily getting that marriage license. We just sort of create a spouse, create a wifey, we've heard, right? We also get divorced without getting divorced. We just sort of leave sometimes, right? And so, and the worst part about that is we may leave and then get a new spouse without, again, getting divorced or getting remarried.
Yeah.
And then if that case is true, the whole formula that the court has doesn't apply. If we have children that sometimes go about their own business and don't necessarily care for their children that we take in. Now, I know so many grandparents who adopt their grandchildren without adopting them legally. They adopt community children. I tell you, I have the ultimate blend in siblings. I have, my father has extra children. My mom has extra children, and we have a brother who's not a brother by blood with mother or father. He's just there, right? But if we don't have any, you can leave something to anybody if you have a legal will, right? I tell people all the time that we love openly, but the court does not recognize that. One of my favorite scriptures is write the vision and make it plain. So those who run with it, right? Those who read it, run with it. But more importantly, that the court recognizes and enforces it, right? The other piece about that is, as I mentioned previously, that we can sometimes get divorced without getting divorced.
Yeah.
I will say to you that you cannot disinherit your spouse. So even if we think you're done and you think you wrote it out, the court will not, unless you live in Georgia, the court does not acknowledge a disinheritance of your spouse.
Interesting.
So realize just because they left, I've had a number of exes, or so they thought, exes, show up after the funeral or even at the funeral with their hand out ready to receive. Right. So even if you say in the will, I'm giving $1 to my spouse. Oh, no. They can get what is called the elective share, which allows them to say, I'm going to collect my elective share, which means that if there was no will, this is what I would have collected. Right. So we got to be thoughtful about making sure we have our ducks in order, or being mindful of how to avoid it if need be. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way.
I think a lot of this, Amy, comes down to a huge change of mindset for us culturally, where we have to think about these type of things. And I hate to use the word, but even if we get into the weeds of it, we need to get into the weeds of it. So when the time happens, the correct things will happen in the court. And I think that's what you're sharing with us.
Or I'm saying that we can avoid the court, because if we have our stuff together,
right?
If we have our stuff together, we avoid the court. And so that's what we don't necessarily do. It's like, again, if we don't have a plan, because I talked about planning, if indeed we, if we die, we need to have a plan. If we're sick, we need to have a plan.
Good point.
Because most of us say, oh no, I just plan to just drop dead in my sleep when I'm 114, right?
Right.
And that would be great if we could plan it, if we could orchestrate that, that'd be the best, but we can't.
Right.
Now, and if we don't, if we get sick and we can't manage our finances or make decisions for ourselves, the court's going to appoint somebody to do that. Right? They're going to appoint someone to serve as the guardian. Now, when that may or may not be cool, because it may or may not be your loved one, your daughter, your child, your spouse, right? But I will tell you, the court's all up in your business. That means that if you end up having your loved one appointed, you're still, in order to get to the guardianship process, there's going to be a lawyer who's appointed for the person who's disabled. There's going to be another lawyer there's going to be 2 other lawyers who are appointed, right? And you got to pay for that. Wow. Right? And then there's got to be a report that's filed every year. Now, if you have in one case, we had this person who didn't have a family that was involved in their lives, and they did have a good friend who was very involved and came to me, and they wanted to have someone appointed as the guardian. And unfortunately, this was a person who had a criminal background. She had turned her life around. She was really good 20 years ago. However, the court does not allow anybody who's had a criminal background to serve, irrespective of who they are. So, because you have to also have good credit. Okay. And so that meant they had to pay somebody else to serve as the guardian. So that meant their estate was paying for a number of attorneys to act on behalf of the disabled person, right? Now, in looking at the fee petition that the guardian had, they were charged $400 an hour. In one circumstance, there's an hour to get to the bank, an hour at the bank to open an account for this guardianship, and another hour to get back to the bank. That was $1,200. So if we think about how that guardian is, doing what they're supposed to do, but depletes the assets of the estate if we don't strategically plan. Wow. Right? If we didn't make a plan to have, if in case I am sick, if we don't take those efforts, that's when it's going to happen. We need to strategically build our arsenal, right? So we need to avoid probate because we don't want to pay the court to do that. And how do we do that? One of the ways that we can do that is put beneficiaries on all of your accounts so that your life insurance goes to whomever you want it to go to when you pass away, and a backup in case that person isn't able to receive when you are passed away. We do a transfer on death deed for your real property if your state permits that, or a life estate deed if your state permits it. Again, remember, this is state law, so different states have different things. But I've had people come to us and they have bank accounts where they have payable on death on all of them, but they have properties in 3 different states. So that means we have to open an estate probate in each of those states. We got to be thoughtful. That means we're paying each state, each court to make sure that happens. So we've got to avoid that as much as possible, right? And so foundationally, these 3 things need to happen. A power of attorney that gives somebody capacity to act on your behalf for financial matters. right? You can be as specific or as broad as you choose it to be. Now, I tell people, I say, I'm a professional pessimist, right? And I don't trust nobody. So you need to think about sometimes how do we put checks and balances in place to make sure that child that you've, or that person that you have appointed as your power of attorney doesn't say Amy needs a Tesla to make sure she can get to the doctor's appointments on time, right? So we need to be thinking about how do we prepare that in such a way that we have checks and balances. And remember, a power of attorney is valid up until the date of death or until you change it. The second circle is the healthcare packet. Who do you want to speak for you regarding your healthcare? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Would you want to have tube feeding if you're unable to feed yourself or in a persistent vegetative state, right? And who do you want to have access to your health information? All that should be in your healthcare packet. And then thirdly, that last will and testament, which that's foundationally, that again directs the probate process. You need to have this stuff when you're 18, right? Making that decision when you're 18. Then one of the things that I always encourage people to be thinking about, and that's strategically about planning for taxation. What does that look like? How do you prepare and plan for it? Again, a good Christian that says, give Caesar what is Caesar's, right? But that means pay what you have to, not what, if you don't plan, you pay more, right? So one of our great examples is Prince. Prince's estate paid $370 million in taxes.
Wow.
Right. Now, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And it can be avoided, if at least minimized, right? So we need to be thinking about how do we make that happen? How do we minimize it as much as possible? As opposed, I'm going to, in my mind's eye, I'd rather give it to charity. Right. And if you think about the HBCUs that would have wanted, would have benefited by that $370 million instead of having it go to the taxes. So I encourage people to be thinking about how do I strategically plan accordingly? Now, many of us don't have $370 million, but again, as I was saying, I think I'm not sure what I was saying earlier, but I was just a client who came to us because they were distressed. They had to pay $18,000 in inheritance tax. So what we don't know is if we don't plan, the default is you're going to be taxed at their highest level. But if we plan, we can try to minimize it.
Amy, your tax planning part is so on point because right now I'm actually going through that. My wife's dad passed in December and we finally memorialized him last week because of COVID and everything. But we're in that situation. There was an account that he had that has a couple of dollars in it. Now my wife and mother-in-law have been trying to be as strategic, working with an attorney in Philly, trying to be as strategic as possible to do whatever with the money, because there was no will to state what to do with it, but to do it and not get beat up by IRS.
And I will say to you, Philly is one of the worst.
Thanks a lot.
No, I'm telling you, Philly is one of the worst.
Wow.
And because for a while there, we had an attorney who, and my daughter is an attorney in Philly as well, right. But it is one of the worst.
Thanks a lot. We'll definitely keep that.
I mean, again, it is the taxes. So that's why we need to strategically plan. That's why we need to be thoughtful. If we don't, we can't, right? We're subjected to whatever happens when we don't plan.
That's the truth.
Right. So beyond the basics, what we need to be thinking about is a revocable trust. And that means if I'm trying to build a legacy for my loved ones, these are the things that I want to put in place to build a legacy. A revocable trust is an extension of me, and we can plan for our circumstances accordingly. But we need to be thinking about what happens next, right? Again, building this, we start during our lifetime, but building it out. We get to change the rules every which way. A revocable trust is an extension of me. right? So it uses my social security number as an identifier, right? And so we can plan for, like my husband and I can plan for our trust. Like if when one of us passes away, the other one still goes on and is a trustee. But since we're a blended family, we get to be strategic and thoughtful about how do we plan for our children and honoring all of our relationships, right? And I will say to you that we need to be thinking about, as I say all of the time, we honor the relationships that we have. And I will say again, that I am very mindful, not so much about my children, but my children's children, trying to be thinking about how do we strategically build. One, we are excited about my husband's daughter is going to have a baby in August. And so what we talked about is we're giving her, the baby upon birth, a significant life insurance policy.
Wow.
Right. Okay. So because what we know is that the cheapest life insurance is the youngest, right? Oh, so and I try to tell people, grandparents ideally should give at least $1 million life insurance policy, right? For their grandchild. Let's think about this because we're thinking about legacy building for our kids. If I put a $1 million life insurance policy, whole life, that the baby, it's a custom life so that they're not paying for it for, let's say 15 years, let's say we pay for it. And if we believe in God that we'll live that long, if we don't live that long, our trust will continue to pay for it, right? For that 15 years. And then we don't have to pay for it anymore. But they can borrow from it for college. Right? If they borrow, let's say, and I'm going to use big numbers because I'm a lawyer, so my math is limited. So let's say that through college, they pay $400,000 for that, right? And then when they come out, we give them or let them borrow $100,000 for a down payment on the house. Right? Now, most of us, that was part of the biggest struggle, getting that down payment for the house. Yes. But if we were to give them $100,000, do you know how much earlier? Because what we know is we want them to build those assets sooner. Right. That's part of the Black community struggle, is that if we can't afford to buy a house till we're 40 or 50, then we have a less amount of time to build equity, right? So if we can help our children get that sooner rather than later. Now, let me share with you a couple of things about that trust. That life insurance policy in my trust, I own it. So it doesn't show up on the FAFSA, right? So their financial aid application form doesn't show this $1 million life insurance policy, even though it's an asset. Got it. Okay. Right? Then, so mind you, their college and stuff is paid for. So it's an asset builder, because I'm very clear about my trust will only be used for asset building, wealth enhancing stuff. No depreciating assets can be purchased from my trust, right? They can do that with their own stuff. But so, and then remember, so let's say we got $1 million life insurance policy. They spent $400,000 for college. And mind you, we put rules around it because they got to satisfactorily progress through college. They can't just be doing that 12-year plan, right? So, right. And then that they are able to, after that, they are, they have that $500,000, and they don't have to, of course, pay that back because they took a loan on their life insurance, but they don't have to pay it back. But when they pass away, $500,000 goes back into the trust for multiple generations. That's legacy building in the Black community.
That's the full life cycle right there. That's what you just described. Wow.
Exactly. If we can strategically plan moving forward how to make that happen for our generation. And again, one of the things that I always want us to talk about is the real property considerations, because in many of our communities, that's where we lose our assets. We all have heard about air property, right? And if I have 75 first cousins, all right? 75. So I have 75 first cousins. So that means that if indeed, and we see it all the time, that if my grandparents grandparents had a home, and if they didn't have a will and they passed it on, and they passed away, the next generation, we see this all the time, the folks live in the houses and don't probate it, right? And that generation passes off, but the house, their folks are still living in it and sort of managing it. If indeed 75 people in my family, own a property, we know that nobody owns it, right? Because you can't get 75 approvals to fix the roof.
Ah, okay.
Right. And so we see that in communities all of the time. And so if we are strategically build, if we strategically build structurally for our planning for next generations, we know in our community how much land is being lost. What we know is we should have had greater assets, but we're not making any more land. And so we need to hold on to it. What happens so many times when we don't have a probate in my house, again, if I have a house and I die and I have 4 kids, unless they can buy each other out, it's sold. We lose that. If one of the other things that we tend to do is we put our kids' names on our deeds, right? We do that to avoid probate, and it does avoid probate. But what happens if, and I use my favorite former next door neighbor as an example. Actually, I have a better example. The lady I was talking to yesterday has a house in Northwest DC that's worth $780,000 right now, but I'm going to change the number to 817 for my math's sake. And the reason why I'm changing is because she bought the house for $17,000, right?
7,000.
She bought the house for $17,000,
Wow.
and it's worth close to 800. I'm going to use 817.
Right.
If she put her kid's name on the deed, it's as if the kid bought it for $17,000. If she sold the property after the mom died, the difference between what you buy it for and what you sell it for is capital gains, and that's taxed.
Ooh.
So we do that to avoid probate. She would avoid probate, but she got capital gains.
Yeah.
In this case, it's better to go through the probate process because what you get is a step up in tax basis. You get a step up in tax basis, which means that it's as if she bought the house for the fair market value at the date of acquisition, right? So it's as if she would have bought the property for $817,000. And then there would be no capital gains conceptually. Right. So those are the things that tax planning, that strategic planning. If we do nothing, then we go to the default. So the reverse mortgage, we talked about that already, that sometimes what we know is that there's a struggle financially and that someone will take a reverse mortgage out instead of getting like a home equity line of credit. I encourage kids to get involved at that point because otherwise you're going to lose that heir property or that property that you could inherit. Let's get our kids together to invest in their support of the parents. So often, unfortunately, I hear parents that come to me and say, my kids don't even know I have this reverse mortgage because we're too fearful or too embarrassed to have a conversation. I encourage people, let's have that open communication about how we can build going forward, right? And then charitable giving. I talk to folks all the time about Black folks give at a greater percentage than any other community, but we don't do it necessarily in a strategic way. Oh. So we can be thinking about how we're giving charitably in a way that our community benefits, our family benefits, and our community benefits, right? But we got to make sure it happens as we plan. Right. I've had folks create family foundations. I had this friend who I read in the newspaper, he gave $250,000 to Howard University. I called him to fuss at him and commend him all at the same breath. Said, look, bro, you should have created a family foundation so that you can get multiple benefits from it. The school will still get it, but let's have you get benefits too. We need to be thinking about that along the way. Let's create more win-win situations in a greater way. But we're being penny wise and pound foolish because we're trying to not get counsel, but we need to make sure that happens. Right. And then business, for our business owners, our entities determine destiny. Again, I had the lawyers I can just tell stories, not just about, I'm going to make them up. This stuff happens. I had a client who had a trust plan created and he had a business. He was a physician. And I said, Dr. Such and Such, you need to create an entity. He said, no, I'm good. And his son was in the practice with him. I said, no, I really recommend that you do something different, that you create a strategy for succession planning, right? And that we incorporate it differently. He said, no, I'm good, right? He was a sole proprietorship and he died. Sole proprietorships means that it's me, that it's my business. And so when I die, it dies too. Now we have a whole mell of a Hess, because now his son who's in the business, he's died. The business needs to be wrapped up. You don't just, you can't live beyond it when it's a sole proprietorship. Your entity determines your destiny, and we need to strategically plan accordingly. Again, I can tell you so many stories of what happens when, which helps me be this professional pessimist, because I see it happen all the time, and I try to avoid it for my loved ones, that come to us. But what we know is with business succession planning, I talk about the 5 Ds, right? Disability, divorce, departure, dissolution, and death. We need to be planning for all of these things. We need to strategically build what's the best opportunities so that the wealth that we're creating by building a business is not lost. How do we strategically plan, so that it is in our best efforts, so that we're not just like trying to get by, but we're creating something that we can pass on or choose not to, but do it in a way that does not impact.
Wow.
So let's open. We can do questions and answers. There's some in the chat. What do we got here? Rob, have you seen anything?
That was a lot of great information. Thank you so much, Amy. That was amazing. Mark Purnell saying, I love the wealth building plan. How do we scale it? Can you share the wealth building plan slide?
Okie dokie. So one of the things that we, first and foremost, and again, I do a shout out to my brother, Mark Purnell, who is a financial advisor at Coaches Financial Advisors. One of the biggest things that we need to do is tap into the brilliance of our financial advisors, right? We can't, I shouldn't say we can't. So many of us try to be, again, penny wise and pound foolish and say, oh, I got this. I know how to do this on my own. I say, there is safety in a multitude of counsel. We talked about the family office. How do we strategically, collectively plan? Our wealth building is about building together. How do we create that wealth together? If I create a lot of revenue, but I don't strategically plan tax-wise, that's not going to do any good. If I create a lot of revenue, but I die with it and I am taxes, that's not good. Or if I have just a real big checking account, we know there's so much greater that can be done. But again, it is strategically planning for the multitude, right? Strategically planning for my kids and my kids' kids. One of the things that we talked about, even just with business, but also with in life, I'm strategically planning for my kids' kids, that if indeed my children don't stay happily married, that I am thoughtful about. I don't want my stuff caught up in the divorce, if there is one, right? That my stuff is in trust to protect my children's children. We can be thoughtful about that. It's not going to be any legal advice, legal struggles going through that impacts the wealth of my grandchildren. But it's only because I plan.
No, that's good. Let's see, anything else in the chat? Lots of great information from Tanita Lima. Thank you for joining in, Tanita. Danita, my friend Danita says she's ready to make her appointment. That's right, Danita. And you know what's interesting about Danita? She's vice president of finance for an organization, defense contractor, Amy. So she's like you, she's financially there, you know. And she's just a great person.
So let me ask you, so what has been your hesitation so far prior to this? I mean, granted, you hadn't met me yet, but
there you go. Finding someone reputable.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Amy has been a blessing to Ethos 108, and just since I've met her, she's been blessed with all the information. And Mark, I would like to.
If you want the slides, just go to our my firm's website, and on the contact us form, ask for those slides, and I'll send them to you.
Ready for an annual follow-up, Attorney Griffin? I have a grandson now.
Oh, praise the Lord, Ms. Ada. So let me just share with you, one of the things that often happens is that folks don't revisit their plan. And I had folks who had plans 14 years ago. They didn't have kids, husband, or have an old husband and a new kid, right? But making sure that what they have is still relevant for who they are. We encourage you to be thinking about annually. Do you still have the stuff you have? Do you still like the people you liked, right? As we build it out.
You know what, Amy, you mentioned a really good point, because I'm gonna show my age real quick. But back in the day in Philly, I remember when the insurance man would come to my parents' house, knock on the door, and he was basically like a distant cousin. And he would be like, okay, of course, 12, 13, I didn't know really what was going on. But he came, he was a white guy actually, and we lived in a Black neighborhood. But he came in and he spent about a good hour with my parents. And I think they did exactly what you just mentioned, to see where they were, to see where they are, and if they still agree with how that life insurance plan was created.
Well, and the thing is, I pray that one of the things, again, this is my bias, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we should have substantial life insurance. Right? Now, that it is, and they say to us, it should be enough to pay your bills. I say it should be enough to move our generation, the next generation forward. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, we should also be investing, because I know many people say buy term and pay the difference. The problem with buying term, in my mind's eye, is now, I use the example that, again, I just got remarried, and I praise the Lord for my husband. Now, we told each other that there's no divorce, right? We got to die to get out of this marriage. Now, if I have to kill him, I have to kill him, but whatever it is, what it is, right? But when we got married and we were looking at it, getting insurance for, getting insurance for each other. Now we're grown-ups. We're like, almost senior citizens. So it's expensive. But so the question was, should we get that term insurance? But for us, that term, we'd have been about 80 years old. And I'm invested in this brother living longer than 80, right? So if indeed we get to 80, and we don't have our term expired, we can't afford insurance at 80, right? We can't afford what it's going to be. So what we need to do is to get what we needed to get now, and know that it can't expire. We have to be able to afford it forever, right? So when he dies at 97, it still puts money into that's going to move our kids to the next generation.
Interesting,
right? So we got to be thinking about not just for today, but thinking what happens when, right? Yeah. I pray that he doesn't. I mean, that man, I will beat him to death if he dies before 80, right?
I get it.
I've invested in this long-term thing, right?
Definitely. Let's see anything else is in the chat. We need to have a needs analysis provided by a licensed professional, and they do it for free. Okay.
You know what? Thank you, Mark, for that, because you know what? There is so much DIY. That's one of the things. We have our little phones, and we think we can do anything, be anything, know everything, right? Now, mind you, I'm showing you my iPhone 7. So let me. There's 13 now, but I got 7. But what we know is, we need to go to people who know the answers. Don't think that I can know the answer to anything or everything just because I have Google. Go to a professional and find out what's real. And the reality is many professionals have free consultations, right? So take the time to find out what works for you.
Yeah.
Right? And build your family office.
I love that. I love that. That family office. That should be in everybody's mail slot in the Black communities, because I never saw that before. And it makes a lot of sense.
That's right. Well, and the thing is, this is not a new concept. Let me be clear. This
Right.
is not a newbie.
Right. And you mentioned Philly. I mean, Philly, is a very bipolar. I mean, I shouldn't say bipolar, polarized place. Let me delete. Polarized place where you got your Italians here in South Philly that's been there for years, and they have Italian old money there. They have your Jewish area, and they have the old school Jewish area. I mean, the money. And it's been known like that for many years. And then, it's our area where we're learning. And so again, that's really where, this presentation really comes in. I think one thing, Amy, I think one thing that maybe I'm thinking about, maybe me and my peers in quotes, we may look for something, we may see it as overwhelming. I'll put it that way.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, where can I start from A? And you know what I mean?
Exactly. So, right. And it can be a lot, but if you start with one conversation, right? As
Right.
Mark was saying that he builds stuff out, but if you start with one professional, we can create that family office around you.
I love it.
Right. That's what we do too, is that if you choose to, we can build that family office around you, but you got to be willing to do that, right? Invest in your family and invest in yourself.
Absolutely. Let's see if we have anything else in the chat. Okay, I teach that with technology. It is very easy to build a family office. Outstanding, Mark. My family's in what, Germantown? What? I'm from Winfield, man. We need to connect and get you on Ethos 108. So
Mark is a powerful brother. Mark is a powerful brother.
Outstanding, Mark. I look forward to connecting with you. Wow, that's awesome. Oh, great. You felt
That's right.
Family.
It is. We are. I mean, it is. Mark and I are so aligned professionally about.
Yes,
That's what we need to do. That's who we are. That we want to, and that's what so often. What is distressing is people don't appreciate that in our Black community we have greatness, we have excellence, and so so often I hear people say, "Oh, I need to go to my Jewish lawyer or my Jewish financial advisor." You hear that, and part of that is recognizing we got greatness in our community too, right? And so that's the thing, is that we need to take the steps to build our community collectively.
Amy, you just tapped on something very, very strong and deep right there, because we do have to get out of this whole of not going outside of our culture and going to the professional that's right there and supporting. It's our
internalized oppression. I mean, but I mean, admittedly, there are not a lot of Black estate planning professionals, right? And so that's one of the nonprofits I created, was the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, so that we can find each other. And what I know is that the lack of cultural competence is I'm not saying that folks who are not Black are not proficient, but there is often a lack of cultural competence or appreciation of our values. And that's what we are able to share with one another. I say to you, if it doesn't exist, and it's possible it doesn't exist in your community, so you should have someone, right? Don't go without support. You get support. We still go to I'm from a town where there were very few Black doctors, but don't not go to the doctor.
Right. All right. Definitely. Let's see. By the way, the Black family that Amy and her colleague in New Jersey helped insisted on working with a Black attorney. Outstanding. That's what I'm talking about.
That's right. And that's the thing, is, and it's like, reach out. I know Black attorneys all across the country, right? Right. And so we're building that network. And the key is building those financial advisors and building the accountants. We got to do that. If we don't ask, we're not going to get the answer. That's right. If you don't ask the question, you're not going to get the answer to the question.
That is the truth. Wow. Any other questions or great comments? Outstanding. Thank you so much, Mark. I'll hit you up. 414. Gotcha.
Oh, don't say it publicly.
Oh, yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Mark. Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, Amy. Hopefully this isn't the end, because hopefully this is just the beginning of relationship of educating. Educating about what we can do. And as you said, that it's not overloaded. That can be packaged in a way that, hey, we can do it, So yes, I thank you.
You're very welcome, Kimberly.
Outstanding.
All righty. Well, this was great. And I'm glad, Rob, that we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much for, like I said, taking the time out on a Saturday, a beautiful Saturday, to talk about this, because this is definitely needed. And for me personally, I'm right in there, with an 11-year-old, with two parents that are blessed to be 81 this year. And it's like, yo, I need the information. I am the layman.
All righty. Well,
yeah.
Okay, check out, and for those folks, get on to Ethos 108, send Rob the contact information, or to be on his email list. The work that they do, the network that he's building is amazing. So I'm excited about it, and I know that the best is yet to come. Have a great weekend, you all.
Yeah, please email me, y'all. Kimberly, Mark, these are names that I did not know of prior to the session. So yeah, I definitely look forward to connecting. There was somebody else on here too.
Well, we can, so we can send a follow-up email. Okay.
Exactly. Thanks again, Amy. Thanks.
You're
again.
very welcome. Have a great one.
Have a great
Bye-bye.